Lots going on in Olympia, but first and foremost is our focus on education. There's been a lot of talk as far as where we're going with education, and especially education funding. Overarching all of this is what we call the McCleary case. It's a Supreme Court decision that basically said we here in Washington State are not fully funding education from the state standpoint. Here in Washington, we probably have the strongest constitution when it comes to the state's duty to provide for education. I think all of us as legislators have come down to Olympia parroting the phrase, education is the paramount duty of the state. But if you really look at what's happened in our budgets, that hasn't been the case. Over the past 30 years, what you've seen is non-educational expenditures outpacing education by 2 to 1. So that even though all of us come down and say education is our paramount duty and our top priority, when it comes to budgeting, that value is not reflected in our priorities. This past year in the Majority Coalition, we really did change that. And if you look at the final budget that was adopted with our prioritizations in education, we really switched that dynamic. Instead of 2 to 1 as far as non-education to education, what you had was we had 12% growth in education funding, and that's early learning, K through 12, and higher ed. And you only had 2.6% growth in non-education funding. So we went from 2 to 1 to actually flipping that over to 4 to 1. And I think that's really the direction that we need to go. If you look at where we're at from the Supreme Court, I think there's 2 ways to actually address that situation. One, we can simply say we're going to fulfill the court's definition of basic education. I think we have a higher duty, and I think most of my constituents do too. What we're seeing, though, is if all we do is fulfill the court's duty, I don't think we get to the system that all of us want, and that is a world-class education system for our kids. The environment that they're going to be facing in a global high-tech world is much more competitive than anything that our generation saw. They need to have the tools and resources ready so that they can compete in that environment. If you look at on an international basis where we're at, if you take the top 34 industrialized countries, in mathematics we're 21st, in reading we're 17th, in writing we're 21st. Those are numbers that don't bode well in an information age where intelligence matters. Intelligence is really your economic capital in the future. So we got a long ways to go. I think really what we need to do is make sure we're focusing on student achievement, focusing on the real goal of what we're trying to do, and that's give every kid a world-class education.